Greetings, Summoners. Cosmic here, and welcome to the first card set review, starting with red for Battle Spirits Saga, first set, Dawn of History. Really quickly, just as all these videos are going to do, because there were such major spoilers at the end of red, I really am just going to wait until the full color is out and just go from there, because the last two cards that we got were absolutely insane for what they mean in both red, which is obviously good. Like, all cards are going to be good within their own color, but what it really means from a splashability standpoint. So every video is going to be designed the same way, where we just talk through every card, give my quick impressions, then maybe towards the end of the meta, we'll do a recap and see how things ended up shaking out. But first, we're going to start it with just 001 and go in order. So we have Supernova Dragon Sigworm Nova. This is obviously our poster child of the set, big guy on the front, big lore character, and is really just meant to be our all-star. And I'm sure it's going to end up being the Saga rare as well for the first set, the highest rarity that we're going to see from a foiling perspective. But it's a very interesting card. So it's cost of 8 with 3 reduction. So it is very, very expensive. Like 8 cost in this game is quite a bit, and when you only have 3 reduction, you're definitely going to feel that. But on top of his the already paying core cost high point, you also have to give up a 6 drop on the field, so you have to commit something on the turn prior. And obviously, like Andromeda, who's talked about in the red starter deck, is going to be a very good target for that, because you get to kill something or kill a Nexus and then set it up for the next turn. There are going to be more 6 drops obviously in the future, right? It's just a cost 6 or more, so if you splash another color, I guess you could really go the distance on it. But we're going to talk about why it's so important. Then we have one particular card, but this card is very, very expensive up front. That said, we do get a lot of value out of it. So it does have the Awaken ability, which is kind of just great to have, but not really that important, considering everything else it does. But one core for 5,000, 3 cores for 9,000, which is really, really important, and then 5 cores for 12,000. So it's really nice is if you have Sigworm, which is from the starter deck, the 6 cost with Confront, you actually get to heal. If you banish your soul core, which means you don't get it back for the rest of the game, you'll get to heal up to 5 life. So that's really important. If you're at 1, you go all the way up to 5, which is, you know, a huge deal in itself. But sometimes just even healing a couple life can make a huge difference in your survivability of the game. And then what's really nice beyond that is the level 2 and level 3. So that's what really gets difficult with this card. We're going to talk about a card later that does make all this a little bit easier, but just from a pure consistency standpoint, because there's going to be 2 very different ways to build a Nova deck. You have that level 2 that select any number of your opponent's spirits when it attacks with a combined BP of 10k and fewer and destroy them. So if you're going against something like yellow, or maybe even the weaker spirits of purple, you're going to heal up, even if it's just like, you only heal up 1, you go from 4 to 5, but you're able to swing out, destroy 2, 3, 4, 5, units or more if you're going against yellow with this, and really swing the board in your favor. So from all the extra rares at least, and even though, yes, the cost is expensive, and yes, we might see a more combo style of deck from it, this is by far my favorite card for what deck I'm most excited to build with, because it can play into a very mid-range style of grindy deck when this is your top-end finisher, again, your key spirit, to use the Battle Spirits term, or it's just, you can also build a combo deck, and you're not going to, like, kill them out of nowhere with just being able to say, hey, I'm going to swing for, 2 attacks and delete your board. Well, maybe the second one then is going to be, you can't get the life twice, and you have to sacrifice another Ascend, but, the second Nova, if you live in some crazy world where you ramped a bunch of cores and it's late game and you're getting 2 of these effects off, you're going to end the game, obviously, in 2 or 3 turns, because you're just going to be able to constantly delete and pressure whatever your opponent has. But you also, at the same time, can't just, unless you've like healed up to 5 and maybe have a key spell in your hand or something, you can't just slam this on the board, hope the deletion is going to get you there. Because if your opponent's playing around it, you're going to be defenseless after that, and they're just going to crack back and take all 5 lives if it's that late in the game. You have to remember, a lot of these other decks are going to have ways to recoup their board, recoup their hand, that, yes, it's a very strong effect, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that you could die in the crackback. So make sure that this isn't like your all-in play, but it's a very, very strong card that I'm looking to see who builds the best deck for in set 1, and just all around. The Saga rare, I'm sure, is going to be absolutely beautiful, and that's what I can't wait for. But very solid card. It is very expensive for what it does, but I think the effects, especially if you're able to get the Sigworm from under it to go banish the Soul Core and heal up a bit, is definitely going to be what you need to stabilize in the big red style of deck, as it's called. Moving on from there, we have one of my other favorite cards, Divine Halberd Dragon Arc. This is a really key card for a couple different reasons. It is a 3 cost with 2 reduction, so it does get a bit cheaper to play. It is a Star Dragon, which is going to be relevant for the reveal effects on Andromedos, which we've talked about in previous videos. But what I really love after playing so much of the yellow deck is that first effect. Neither player's life can be reduced by an attack from a spirit that has 2,000 or fewer BP. This is really important for being able to survive against those early aggressive strategies, especially in yellow, that all have 1,000 or 2,000 BP. Now, again, some turns they might just try to chip in a couple damage, then you play this, and then they just beef up their units and getting those last couple points of chip damage. But just putting this on the board forces your opponent to play in a different way that, you know, it's already just a good card for Star Dragon in its second effect, but I really expect this card to see a lot of play, and it's something that I'm just going to start with 4-ofs in all of my red decks because the second effect has been very relevant, it turns out. So when it attacks for 3 cores at 4,000 and 5 cores at 6,000, and 6,000 is also, one of those magic numbers to hit, select one of your opponent's spirits with 2,000 or fewer BP and destroy it. We've already seen cards such as Freeze-a-Tall that are just straight up, you need to answer them, you need to have some type of removal for them. And Arc just gives you both options, right? You're able to survive against like the early go wide rush strategies, and then you're able to target attack, or I should say attack, and then target with the removal one of their key spirits that you just need to get off the board. So 2,000 is like kind of an interesting spot where it's like 3K would have been probably way too busted, right? Because then that's repeated landmine. But there are some spirits that have that 3,000 power that you wish you could hit. But I think for being an early drop and for the constant threat that it's going to put on the board, like, yes, putting to 3 and 5 cores can be a lot in the early game, but if you're deleting something, you're probably okay with it. So very solid card, absolutely going to be a staple in a lot of red decks in the future, and especially as we start to see like green and, you know, even blue down the line, if they have more of those like go wide or lower weaker creatures, this could also just be a continuous staple. Like, that's one of the main things I really love about this game is, yes, it's a Star Dragon, so obviously you want to play in the set 1 Star Dragon deck. That makes sense, but there could be whatever the next, you know, family that gets supported, or maybe it's like just a generic red deck. This can very easily fit into those decks as an early drop that you want to play for, again, being able to make sure that you're not just auto dead to aggro, which some decks, you know, will just fold to at the end of the day if you don't respect them or putting cards like Burning Force or what have you. So absolutely love this card, going to be a staple. Obviously there's going to be some discussion of like, oh, do you always run 4, or do you just put it as like a 2 to 3 because aggro is not as relevant maybe, and you don't need to focus on Star Dragon. So it might not always be a 4-of. I'm going to start with it as a 4-of, but we'll see where the meta shakes out and how much utility this one card really grants us. Now, talking about various deck building strategies, we have Divine Mars Dragon Ares Dragoon. It's a 6 cost with 4 reduction, and this card's really important for a card that we're going to talk about later, Big Bang Energy, but also for its third effect. So there's kind of, we've seen the Star Dragon deck, we've seen the Dino deck, which we're going to talk later in the video, and now we're seeing this third style where, what if you had just enough cores that you can move them from unit to unit to unit to unit to unit on every attack, and then somehow get a refresh on top of it? So at level 1, 2, and 3, he has Awaken, which is really important, but then level 3, which is 6 cores at 7,000, so I want to add that disclaimer up front. 7,000 power for 6 cores is pretty weak, but Awaken's a very strong mechanic for the amount of cores that you need to have like on your field, right? You have much, it's not like you have to put 6 cores on every single spirit that you're going to have. It's just going to be 5 cores that you move around. You can keep bumping them all up to 6. So when the spirit attacks, when the battle ends, once per turn, you may refresh all of your spirits with Awaken. Now, at the time of recording, and I'm assuming that only red will have it, but there's not really a great Awakening pool available in set 1. Like, we have the 2-drop, we have Moonbow Dragon, we have this, and we have White Hole Dragon. I think that's like just literally those 4 cards. Obviously, and then Nova, right? Nova being the other one, but that doesn't quite fit into the strategy. It really brings the question into focus. Is like, okay, well, I love it as a Star Dragon, so it counts if you want the Star Dragons. It's obviously just a strong effect if you have a couple extra attackers with Awaken and they're moving all their cores together. But this might actually just be its own archetype that you can build out. And yes, it's going to be rely very heavily on Big Bang Energy, which only is going to reduce some of those Star Dragons, not all the Awaken cards you have, but the other ones are cheap enough you play them anyway, sort of thing. And I'm really curious to see where this goes, because multi-attacks in the history of battle spirits and just in general is very strong. So I could see a world where you're playing this very control style of deck, and it finishes like a timing standpoint, like a mid-range deck, and then you just have this like go down to 1 life, big bang energy finish, and you just are playing like 4 or 5 spirits that all have awaken and all move those cores between them, and getting to 5, 6, 7, or 8k is sometimes all you need to crash through the board or force your opponent to block, and then you awaken those cores away so you can put it on something else. Like, I really do love this card. Again, I think it's probably something that's going to be far too inconsistent in the first set just because of the limited amount of characters with awaken that we have, but this is one that's definitely going to be on my radar in the near future. Well, near future being set 2, I guess. And then right into it, White Hole Dragon, 4 cost with 1 reduction, with only 1 reduction. It is a Star Dragon, which if you care about the number of Star Dragons in your deck off of Andromedos, obviously that's good consideration. It has Awaken, but then the point is select one of your opponent's spirits when it's destroyed, and destroy opponent's spirit with BP equal to or fewer than this one. So it caps out at 6k, and to be fair, a 6k on block and remove something else is quite strong in a more mid-range strategy. But again, this is quite expensive to put on the field. The awakens, like, you can't then like awaken off of him, right? Because you need the level 3 to trigger when he's being destroyed. So you can't just move the cores off and be like, oh, haha, got you for both. And plus it would lower his BP anyways. So this one's a little bit interesting. It seems almost counterproductive. Like, obviously the big part is like, oh, I'm going to attack out with my other spirits, leave this back on defense, and then it acts as 2 blockers, to speak loosely there, and you can awaken cores to him. But Star Dragon already has enough like confront stuff, and like you'd rather just be more proactive in red than be in this very heavy reactive strategy. I will say I love the artwork. I think it's definitely one of my favorites, and I'm really curious to see what the early adopter one looks like. But at least from what we've seen so far and where I kind of expect the meta to go, this is one that I was just very, very medium on. So again, I think it's good if you find a spot for it in Star Dragons, because you're still playing Andromedos, and be able to like, reveal a top 3, see if it's a Star Dragon or not, and put it to your hand. But other than that, we've seen just so much good generic red cards that I don't think you have to focus all in on Star Dragons like we thought previously, and just play other things like, Lava Fish for the early game removal and things of that nature. So I'm really curious, because 6k, again, is a magic number. So I'm really curious to see if the meta slows down enough. I think this could be a very solid pick. But going into a blind open meta where people will be playing everything from as low to the ground, fast as aggro as you can, all the way up to like, let's grind the game to a halt and be controlling. This card is not that exciting. This card is definitely one that wants to know what the meta is going to be like and kind of adopt its strategies from there. So very middle of the ground for me, but could be a lot better. Moving on to more Star Dragons, we have Phobos Dragoon, 5 costs, 3 reduction. Again, kind of all vanillas. I'm just going to like skip over for, but have the same kind of, disclaimer for. If you care about the Star Dragon numbers in your deck, you probably have better cards to play anyways, but if you really just want to get like the most value out of Andromedos, this going to 8k is kind of nice, but we have so much more of set 1 spoilers to go. I can't honestly imagine putting a vanilla in my deck unless it's Rain Needle, because it's a 1 cost, 1 reduction Star Dragon that can go up to 4k power. Just a good early play to have to like trigger landmine or threaten a value block, right? So your opponent doesn't attack you the first couple turns. But the other Star Dragons and other vanillas that we're going to see later, unless they are filling a gap that we have in Pterosaur, for example, I'm just not excited about. So all vanilla is just kind of a flat rating for me. It's like a 1 out of 5 unless you have to play it in the deck. They're just not exciting. Some of the power points are good, but I think that we're going to have way too many good, just like either good generic cards or splash cards that we want to include, that I don't think vanillas are going to be that important in set 1. Continuing on with a 6 cost and 3 reduction, Nebula Dragon. Again, Star Dragon, it's a 6 cost, so it can be used for Nova, so options are great. But while this spirit attacks, it counts as 2 red symbols if it has a soul core on it. So a thing to note here is that this does mean it will deal 2 life points of damage. So this doesn't have Awaken. Like, I wish this had Awaken on it, just like threaten the double attack twice. Maybe that would have been too good. It is only going up to 7k, which also kind of feels a little bad, but this might end up just being your like top end of your more aggressive strategies, because you want to have one card that can threaten 2 damage, and they're forced to block this instead of like your low to the ground spirits that you've played on the previous turn. So like maybe in that regard it finds a home, but ultimately just not that exciting of a card in my opinion. Like, I really would have loved to see like during your main phase counts as 2, and then like you can build up other reduction, just like flat good red reduction. But the artwork is sick. That's probably the nicest thing I'll say about this one. But the fact that you care so much about the soul core in red, and the fact this is only going up to 7k power, like unless you really need something for Nova, I think this is going to be extremely limited to maybe it's the top end that you play in red, just because it threatens 2 damage, and like Double Breaker is just traditionally good in these style of games. But I think otherwise it's just a flat pass. Moving on to our other key archetype is the 8 cost Jurassic King Gigano Rex with 6 reduction. Now, it's really important here too is that static ability. So it does have the full cost reduction of 6. So if you have your spirits on the board, right, it only costs 2 to summon this guy. But then when summoning this spirit from your hand, you may count each symbol on your Pterosaur or Emperor Beast spirits on the field as 2 symbols. So really the way that this deck functions is you're going to play out 3 spirits. That's going to count towards 6 total reductions of his cost, and then just pay 2 more. So there's a lot of free, like 3 cost, 3 reduction, 4 cost, 4 reduction spirits that we're going to talk about. So this does play out like just your big, dummy aggro, dinosaurs go burr style of deck, which is what every card game really needs at the start anyways. But it does have some very blatant weaknesses to it as well. So the level 1 effect is really good against everything except purple, because if you only have Pterosaur Emperor Beast, you can treat this as level 3 at level 1, 2, or 3. So, in red versus red, it's really great because you can just put 1 core on this and you don't have to worry about your opponent removing it, and you can use those cores for other things. That said, now to be fair, if someone was being cheeky and they wanted to try to play like the haha gotcha side of it, you could very well splash Poison Shot in red, especially if you're playing like a slower mid-range style of strategy, and you could just kill their Rex out of nowhere with that magic and just you got them, right? So what's really nice is at the level 2 and 3, it does have Confront, and then it also is a BP boost for the rest of your spirits, so they are able to attack and kind of get through that damage. Now, the major downside that I've seen for this card so far is that it is just very one-dimensional in the type of game that it's going to play. If you have a way to stall the board, or if you have a way to, just block off their attacks for a couple turns until you can build up towards a different strategy, this deck does fall apart quite a bit. Now, there is a Nexus that we're going to talk about later, which does help with that problem, but because of how expensive the Nexus is, and because of how late in the game it's going to be to get that effect, it's not going to be as consistent as you want it to be, and it's not something you can afford to just throw 4 of in the deck. So obviously that's going to be a balancing consideration. In some cases, raw power does just get there. Like that is, red aggro at the end of the day. But as we've seen with things like Friezatal, I mean, you could just like draw 4 cards, vomit a bunch of spirits back on the field, and then swing for game by going even wider than them. We've seen things like Bloody Rain, which can just strip the cores out or prevent your opponent from attacking. So there are a lot of different answers to this in each of the colors, but something to keep in mind is this will just get you dead. There are going to be some games where an aggro deck does aggro things. You get a bunch of those, basically free or almost free spirits, land this big boy on the board, and you might not lose the game immediately, but it is still a 10k confronter deleting something on your board every single turn. So if you're playing another like mid-range strategy and you start to fumble and not be able to recoup that kind of lost board game state, you're going to lose. And I like that side of it too, where it's like there can be a point where you get to play this, they answer your other threats, and then sometimes it's just okay that it's a 10k confront, right? We've seen some Star Dragons that want to get up to a 10k confront, like Andromeda, and can win the game from there, and Rex kind of has that built in. So I do like this card from like, it is obviously a very key archetype that we're going to see in set 1. I expect a lot of people to play it. I expect a lot of people to lose to it, early on before they start to add removal into their decks. But it is kind of crazy how just pure strength that it has on the BP side, which also then makes me wonder, what is white going to get? Because, red and white are usually the ones that are going at one another, and maybe white will have some kind of taunt mechanic where it's like you force their Pterosaur to attack, so you delete some of their cost reduction side of things. Like I could really see that being a thing. But there's going to be some other types of battle tricks that I'm sure that we'll see in set 1 to kind of counter this play for Rex. So really love this. Absolutely going to be one of the first cards that we play in decks that we build. But we have to see what kind of ratios or what the ratios are looking like. Moving on from there, we have a 4 cost and 2 reduction. Centaurosaurus. This is our, Andromedos kind of mirror, but not. So 4 cost, 2 reduction. When it attacks, reveal the top card. If it's a Pterosaur, add it to hand. If not, return it to top of the deck. So it's just a top deck revealer and card draw. And then kind of the more important side of it is when the spirit attacks, gain 1,000 BP for every Pterosaur spirit. So The trade-off here, Andromedos does dig deeper, which is really nice, especially if you're looking for Nova. But this one, their power can get out of control really, really quickly. Like, it's not hard. It's for every Pterosaurus spirit, not other. Like, it does count itself. So it is a 6K on attack, and it's very easy to get this thing up to 8K. So this is also still a very aggressive spirit that your opponent has to deal with one way or another. And of course, if you're going against purple and you can core drain it and get it to just be a 2K, it's going to be very easy to kill at that point. But it is something that on attack is going to be pretty scary. And then if it replaces itself by drawing a card, you're already happy with, breaking even. And then every turn beyond that, if it continues to generate you card value, that's probably what you want to be doing. That said, in experience, this, from at least some of the early builds we've seen, this effect is very inconsistent because the pterosaur density of like things like you must play is pretty low right now. But I think this is definitely another one where it's like, as future sets come out and as we see more pterosaurs, this is a pretty scary card, all things considered. So really curious to see where this ends up. I think you're still playing it in Rex in the majority of situations. And just really curious to see what the rest of the pterosaur package is going to look like in terms of what do ratios come in at. The other pterosaur that I'm really excited about, and this goes back to what I was going to mention about like the more generic cards, right? So 7 cost 4 reduction, Raging Dyrano Rex, a tongue twister there. This one is interesting. So it is like a very dedicated mid-range spirit. It has Confront on 1, 2, and 3, which is great. It goes up to 9K for 5 cores. You can have like Scorch Battlefield, very easily make this 10, but then on top of that for level 3, select one of your opponent's spirits with 4,000 fewer BP and destroy it. So this thing deletes board states. We've seen things that work for Confront. There's a Nexus for it. We're going to see later things that work with Pterosaur and deleting stuff. So there is a just generic good red stuff, the deck that exists in set 1. If you're someone who doesn't want to build on Pterosaur, you don't want to build into Star Dragons, there is more than likely enough good red stuff, the deck, like as a third option to build, because of how strong some of these Confront mechanics can be. Because again, you have to remember that when you're building out Scourge Battlefield, when you have things like a plus 2K battle power, battle trick, to play during combat, those Confronts are just going to slowly get you card advantage over the course of the game. And if you're playing something like Parasaur Dino from the starter deck to draw you cards on top of that, your opponent is very quickly just not going to have a spirit to play, and they will just die to the value generated from Confront. So I think Confront overall is just a very strong keyword, and I think this is the strongest Confront that we see that's not a Star Dragon in set 1 as well, off the top of my head. So 1 Scorch Battlefield's all you need to make it to 10K, which is kind of the magic number we've seen, and hitting 4K is a lot, especially a lot of those 6 and 7 cost spirits that might only have 1 core on them. You're suddenly able to delete them out of nowhere. Now, of course, once this is on the board, your opponent's going to play around it and try to bump it up to level 2 or level 3. But if they're delaying their kind of like mid-range or late game threats because you have this on the board and they haven't been able to answer it yet, you're probably just still winning at that point. So it is a little expensive, but I think the powerful effect is worth it. And of course, it's a Pterosaur, so you probably are playing like a 2 of in the other Rex deck anyways. But I would really be curious to see if someone built just a Confront-focused deck with all the BP boosters that Red has, could very well be its own deck. So very excited to see where this card lands. 1 cost, 1 reduction, Oviraptidon. Again, this is just the Star Dragon equivalent. It's a 1-drop. You're playing this in the Rex deck because it's a vanilla 1-drop. You can play early. Great defense. Goes up to 4K. Does everything you want to do. This is probably the only staple that you're going to, put into a deck. And then if there is ever like a 1 to 2 cost red rush deck, which yellow just seems to do way better anyways, obviously that's a consideration as well, because you can play 4 of these, 4 of Rain Needle, and suddenly you have a bunch of, quote, free, red spirits to go wide on the board. Now, obviously you're going to need a lot of draw power to get around that. And there's going to be things like Flame Wall, Block on Rested. Like there's a lot of things that are going to stop you from being able to do that, but there are going to be some people who just build very greedy decks, and you can play the aha got you, or in the case of white, sometimes you just don't draw well. Like your hands are just bricks sometimes with how expensive things can be. So again, very stable card for Pterosaur. Probably not much more needs to be said about that guy. Same thing as well. I really like this one because it's a 4 cost, 4 reduction. Does go up to 6K, which is a nice number. It's a Pterosaur. We need it for Rex. We need it for the reveal on top. Overall, very solid card. I like this one. Again, it is a 4 cost, which is a little expensive, but I'm sure this will end up making the cut for the Rex deck. Good vanilla, staple, what have you. Pentaceratops, this one goes to 8K, but it's a 5 for 4, so this gets into the little bit more of a maybe too expensive category because you do want to focus on those lower end threats so you can play Rex sooner. So not much to say about that. It's nice it goes up to 8K, but personally not a fan. I don't think this card ever makes the cut. Now, another card that I am very, very excited about is Stormbeast Emperor Thunder Leon. There's a lot of debate about this card, but honestly, it's one of my favorite red cards in the set, and here's why. So it is a generic enough good card that's not going to be instantly replaced in set 2. And it's also just a really nice thing to have as kind of like a catch-all in case your opponent is playing some aggro deck, or in some cases, they are just trying to go wide, stabilize the board. And 2K hits a surprising amount of units. So if you're able to kill 2 things with this and have a blocker that, just blocks and dies, that's fine. That does a world of wonder for your like board control strategies. And then on top of that, let's say that it's kind of getting like in the mid game, you have extra cores, you're not really able to do much without that. Not only did you get to delete probably 2 or 3 spirits, now the card replaces itself on its first attack and then just threatens to continue to draw cards every turn that it stays on the board. And 8K is a pretty good amount of power. So this is the other one that this is just a good generic red card that I could see like in a Scorched Battlefield style of deck. And it's not too hard to get it up to 9K power, which then with a single spell gets it up to 11K, which is going to kill a lot. And again, yes, that is a lot to get to that point, but you're going to be drawing a bunch of extra cards in red, so you'll probably have access to it. I think this card absolutely slaps. It might not be something that's meta relevant day one because not everyone's on aggro decks or what have you, but this is a card that I am going to want 2 to 4 of, like 2 absolute minimum in my collection because of how good this card actually is in the right metas. And again, sometimes it's an Emperor Beast. Sometimes you just care about having an Emperor Beast on the field, and it can draw itself to replace itself even if you kill 1 spirit, right? And then put it into play as a blocker. That's also fine. Card slaps. People are sleeping on it. Absolutely love Leon. The other side of that is way more niche and definitely makes you appreciate that Leon is an X-rare right away, is the Flame Emperor and Agnifen. This is a 3 and a 6 cost at 3 cores. When summoned, destroy all your opponent's 4,000 or fewer BPs that have when summon effects. So this one's rough. There are a lot of good spirits that you can hit for 4K with an on summon, but unless you're going against yellow, that 4K might as well be the same as 2K because you have things like Dark King Snake. But unless you play this immediately on the next turn, their Dark King Snake is going to go to level 3 on the next, and then this card does nothing. So especially if you consider on average how much this card compared against like Leon is going to hit. Leon's obviously a very strong X-rare then. And I'm just overall not too excited for this card. And it is a rare too, which like I get it. Removal is very good. Getting to hit like 2 or 3 can be good as well. But when summon just hasn't quite been there yet value-wise, other than yellow, which again, by nature is very weak, and Leon just does it better for the same exact cost. So I got to give the flex spot, as it were, to just Leon instead. There might be some mid-range metas where you see more of 4 cost, or 4K when summon effects, but right, for what we've seen early on, spoilers, that ain't it. 3 cost, 2 reduction, Dilophosa. This is great. This is, again, going back into the red aggressive strategy. If you're playing like a bunch of 1-drops and 2-drops, it's a 3 cost, 2 reduction. So you pay 1, put it in the field, and just keep swinging and giving your opponent a bunch of mana to work with. But this thing goes up to 8K. So it is going to chip away at your opponent's board if they try to block it. And in the most aggressive red strategies, that's kind of just where you want to be. Now, for like Emperor Beast Rex and things of that nature, I don't like this card at all because it can't block, and it creates some very awkward situations where it's like you just need a couple blockers just in case your opponent has a couple more go wide strategies or has like a bounce spell for your main thing. And this card can just feel pretty bad. So I think you might end up playing a couple just as like a low drop insurance that you hit them, but ultimately not that excited for this card at all unless it's in a very aggressive strategy. Fierce Gore Horn Grizzly, a 3-drop with 1 reduction. This card slaps. It has Confront at 2 and 3. It's a great early turn play. 5 and 6K power hits a ton in the early game, and sometimes you just need a couple turns to build up, draw more cards, and kind of delay the game, so to speak. And this does a very good job at that. Same with the Ducky Dino that we've seen, or Parasaur from the starter decks. that it's going to be interesting to see which side that you take of this. Like, yes, Parasaur is a turn later, but it can draw you a card, it can draw you multiple cards, where this is just I'm going to play it on turn 1 and force your opponent to either have an answer very quickly, or they're just going to continue to have their board chipped away at. So again, it's one of those things like against white or maybe some like the higher end stuff of purple, it's really not great. But if they're playing yellow or like low to the ground red, this thing is crazy good, and it's really going to give your opponent some heartburn on how to play around it. So card is very good. Not exactly sure where it's going to see play yet, but it's also an Emperor Beast, so obviously it goes in there. But I think this is definitely one of the more like flexible cards that you're excited to see. Cornered Flame Rat is another Emperor Beast. Now, this card I do love with a 2 cost and 1 reduction for the Emperor Beast Pterosaur deck. When the Spirit attacks, draw a card and you reduce your opponent's life with the Spirit's attack. This is low to the ground enough that you're probably going to be able to get a draw off of it to have it replace itself, and that can also threaten multiple draws later in the game, depending on how the board state plays out and where your confront effects come in at. So this card, it might... It's one of those things where, like, yes, the 3 cost, 3 cores and 3K might not be the most exciting, but just even getting 1 card draw out of this, I think is good enough that you're going to be playing as your low cost option to try to get out Emperor Rex early. Card is very good for that regard. On the other hand, we have Horned Penguin, which is another 2 cost in 1 reduction. Again, you're probably playing just because you have to figure out what your low cost curve looks like for Emperor Beasts and Pterosaurs. It's a 1 at 2,000 and 4 at 6,000. So it's nice that it has the option to go up to 6K, but ultimately it is a vanilla, so same disclaimer as the rest of them. It is just a vanilla card, and you're not ultimately that excited about it. The artwork is cute. I mean, look at that little baby penguin. It is adorable, but the effect itself and what it means is a little bit less exciting. Then we have Bearded Eagle, a 3 cost reduction with Emperor Beast. This is the other one that we say it's a 3 cost, it's free, plays itself. This one is absolute gas for Rex because, again, being able to make sure that you can get up to like that 3 beyond 6K, like 3K, going above 3K, so 4K and 7, so you're above 6. Those are the 2 key breakpoints that you have, so you don't just die to some type of removal. But then again, Rex does boost your board on attack, which is very relevant. But this is a card that I'm curious to see where it ends up at, because again, I think you want to play, and I have to go back and like make a list, and we will once we have the full spoilers. But I would definitely start with all the, free, like 3 cost 3 reduction, 4 cost 4 reduction, and see where you end up with on a curve, and then sprinkle in the extra, 2 cost 1 reduction, Emperor Beast or Pterosaurs to help make sure you're smoothing out towards that Rex. Now, again, this is just pure vanilla power beatdown style of deck. So you will be playing more vanillas than most other decks on average, right? Like more vanilla decks than maybe even the white Nexus card that refreshes your vanillas, which I don't think that's a real card anyways, but different topic for a different video. So don't be too scared of running them, because you do have to care about a certain threshold of Emperor Beast and Pterosaurs in your deck, and Bearded Eagle hits some nice numbers. Beyond that, we have Rhinoceros, Vaharanosaurus, that is, 4 cost reduction Emperor Beast. Same thing again, it does cost 1, so this is kind of like the second tier of consideration for vanillas that I would put in the deck. But if you need something else that can hit 7K power by itself, it is really nice to do that at only 3 cores. Dragno Guard, 3 cost 3 reduction, another kind of free red as we get into it. But important note to note here is while this spirit attacks, if it destroys something by BP, battling, you get to destroy one of your opponent's Nexus. So the fact this only goes up to 5K really leaves, for 4 cores no less, is a bit of a bummer. But as we think about blue coming, maybe set 2, most likely in set 3, Nexus destruction is going to be way more important. So I'm not excited that early on for this card. It can create some interesting board states if people are like all in on Nexus, but it's quite weak ultimately for like its battle power meal to push through damage, because if your opponent doesn't have a Nexus, I mean, this card's just not doing anything else. It can be very, very situational in some matchups where it feels like a medical. That's really what I'm trying to say. It can feel really, really bad in certain matchups. That said, it is a 3 cost 3 reduction. So again, that kind of streamlined, aggressive red strategy, it could be really good for that. Dino Man Trananoid. This is some nightmare fuel in a card. 3 cost 2 reduction. It is a Pterosaur, but treat the spirit as level 3 if you only have 2 or fewer spirits on your field. So like, yeah, it goes up to a 6K. It's a 3 cost for 2. It's a Pterosaur. Like, I think all those are fine, but then you're putting this card in your deck, and that is not a face that I want to look at all day long. So yeah, very solid that it hits 6K. It's a great blocker while you try to dig for your Rex pieces. But man, that is a rough card to look at. And then for a final spirit coming up is 4 costs with 1 reduction, so very expensive, but Blaze Dragonoid Magao. When this spirit attacks, select one of your spirits, place 2 cores from your trash onto it. So this is another card that goes all the way back to like that Awaken style of deck. This can be a very, very strong enabler for the Awaken deck. Getting to have, at some point have 2 of these on board, playing out a bunch of Awaken stuff, and then reviving 4 cores from your trash onto your spirits, and then being able to freely move those around with Awakening. Like, this is probably the key enabler for the deck. That said, it is expensive. It does, get immediately those cores back, so it can go up to, because you play it, you put 3 cores of trash, it goes to attack, select one of your spirits, it can select itself, doesn't say other, put 2 cores onto it, and then becomes a 5K on attacker, or pretty easily, right? Becomes a 6K on attacker. That's pretty good. An early 6K that can then work with other Awaken cards is probably good enough, and that's why it doesn't have a bunch of cost reductions built in, because you do actually want to get some cores to the graveyard, and 2 would be too good, because then it's basically free at that point with Awaken. But there's not a lot else that this is really gone with, so I'm really curious to see if we get any type of other enablers like Awakening that can help us move cores around, or maybe you're just using it for spells, right? This could be a splash card to get some cores back and get them onto your creatures. But white already does that through other effects, like through the Nexus. So I don't think it's like a red-white splash. But I really do like this card. Like, the more I thought about it and how much value you can get out of red with Awaken, I'm tempted. I'm very, very tempted. I think it's only ever good in that situation because we haven't seen enough magic yet. Or maybe it's the red-yellow magic deck, right? Like, those are the 2 very niche combinations I see for it, and Awaken is just a billion times better than pretending that this is going to do something with red yellow magic, but something I'm keeping on my radar, because anytime you're getting cores back and just kind of refueling your mana for the turn, or resources for the turn I should say, it's usually a really strong effect. So really curious to see where Blaze Dragonoid goes from there. Oh, my bad. How could I forget? The greatest face of all is Flamefish. 2 costs, 1 reduction. When destroyed, if the spirit has a soul core on it, select one of your opponent's spirits with 4,000 or fewer BP and destroy it. 4,000 BP is huge. Like, this card kind of slaps. And this is another one where I think you just don't care about, a Star Dragon or Pterosaur deck. Like, this just can be a very real threat. And a 3K blocker is kind of expensive with the 3 cores, but this is always going to threaten killing 2 things, or I shouldn't say always, but this potentially threatens killing 2 things against, say, yellow or other various go-wide strategy decks. So this one might be more of a meta call, and it's like, it is a 2-drop, and yes, we can't put the soul core on it, but it does delete something at 4K, and you target it. But I think it does enough for, especially if we see a more aggressive meta shake out, this card's going to be seeing a lot of play. Really, really interesting card to see where it ends up, just from a playability standpoint, because of 4K being one of those important thresholds that we know about. Getting over like landmine damage, for example, is pretty huge, but it does have the drawback of having a soul core, so multiple of these in the field does nothing. You could combine it with Star Dragon Altar, I guess, or whatever it's called, where you can move the soul core around, but that's not going to be a good combo. That's just something that you're big on the hopium for. But overall, very good generic red card. Very easy to splash in other decks as well, if you have like 1 red Nexus, right? Which we are going to talk about a very good red Nexus coming up. So could make a splash in some other decks as well. Oh, I forgot about this card. Mr. Iguano Knife, 1 cost, no reduction. When summon, all your Pterosaur spirits gain 1,000 BP during this turn. I don't like this card at all. 1 cost rush deck, sure, have it, whatever. Pterosaurs don't care about 1,000. It's a Reptoid, so it doesn't even count towards Pterosaur and Emperor Beast. Like, it doesn't go in that deck anyways. And it boosts Pterosaurs, which we have like the couple low drops you might play. The card's just not great. Like, this is literally just, let's push the envelope as much as we can for low cost spirits and just swing out and see how much damage we can do, sort of thing. And you're playing it for that, but I can't imagine that's a real deck, or at least I hope it's not a real deck. And the card doesn't work or synergize with any of the other decks that we mentioned up to this point. So I'm sorry, buddy. You look like a very sharp little boy, but you are not it for sure. And then perhaps one of my favorite cards is Volcanic Canyon. 4 cost, 2 reduction, so you can play it on turn 1, which is the most important thing. During your draw step, draw 1 additional card. After you draw, discard a card from your hand, and this does stack. So if you have 2 of these in play, you are now drawing 3 cards and discarding 2, and that is insane. That's insane for red combo decks. That's insane for the white control decks that traditionally have very poor draw. So just getting to cycle through your deck quicker is a huge pickup. And just other decks in general that need draw engines. This card does it all. And then on top of that, during your attack step, all your spirits gain 1000 BP. So that's just all spirits. That doesn't care about color. And it's only a single chord. Like that does quite a bit. And there are a lot of decks that will just really appreciate having 1000 extra BP for such a low investment. It's kind of crazy how much just 1000, like one Scorched Battlefield or 1 plus 2000 battle power combat trick can shift the game in your favor. So like this card all around is just absolute S tier, both for what it should enable, and off-color decks, like just white in particular. Like I can't wait to jam this into the white deck and try it out for like that consistency and draw. And then red decks, obviously, that are trying to build like the more mid-range strategy. You have to find your key removals at the right point, or just trying to find Nova. And this enables that from a value engine standpoint, right? We talked about Big Bang Energy a lot of time in other videos, and it just ultimately fell pretty flat because we didn't have something like Volcanic Canyon or a magic spell that we're going to talk about later. So again, absolutely stamp of approval. Love this card. 5 cost Ancient Fault with 4 reduction. During your turn, treat this Nexus symbol as 2 red symbols. So that is important. The double cost reduction is really nice. But during your attack step, when one of your Pterosaur spirits destroys an opponent's spirit via comparing BP, select one of your opponent's spirits with BP equal to that of the destroyed spirit and destroy it. So this is where we go back to Rex, where it's like, I was mentioning a major pitfall with that deck is that it is just pure power. And if you have chump blockers, or if you're able to just survive the onslaught for a couple turns, you're able to just generate enough value through other ways and get around it. Now, that said, with Ancient Fault, they can play this pretty early on if after they develop Rex. It only costs 1 for that effect, and suddenly you're losing a lot of your board. So I think this is one of those things where it's like a must find for the Rex deck to really have that closing power that they're looking for. But in your early hands at 5 costs, like this is going to be very difficult to play until after you've already developed your Rex and probably got some value in it. So Rex and that swing should help pressure your opponent's board. And then next turn, after you recover some of your cords, you should be able to play this easily and then close out the game from there. So it's not, it's not like Rex can just close out the game in 1 turn. Even with this, it's going to take 2 or 3 or getting some chip damage in other places, but it's still a very strong card. I think it's worth considering. Where Stars Are Born, 3 costs with 2 reduction. This was going to be a really good card for Star Dragon if we could ever like build out the board, but Volcanic Canyon does what we want to do in every single way. So reveal 1 card from top of your deck for each Star Dragon spirit you control. Add 1 red spirit card from the revealed cards to your hand. Put any remaining cards in the bottom of your deck. And then for 2 cost, level 2, when one of your spirits 4 cost or more attack, select one of your opponent's spirits with 1,000 or fewer BP and destroy it. So again, like that level 2 is really good against yellow decks, but we already have Burning Force, we already have Confront, we already have like a value block and then Landmine. Like we have so many more answers in red already, but we don't care about the level 2, and the level 1 just doesn't feel good practically ever, especially now that we have Star Blessed Draw and the Canyon. So all around, just not that exciting of a card, and I really wish like this card itself should have had Star Dragon on it just to like count for 1 more card. Also like fetch itself off Andromedos. I get it's a balancing thing. That's why it didn't happen yet. But ultimately, I mean, it is just a common at the end of the day. But I was really hoping Star Dragons would have got like a really cool Star Dragon Nexus. And this one was clearly designed as that, but misses the mark a bit in the power level that you'd want it to be. Moving on to another Nexus is a 4 cost Sacred Thundering Peaks. 4 costs with 2 reduction. During your attack step, when one of your spirits is destroyed via comparing BP with one of your opponent's spirits, select a spirit that costs less than the destroyed spirit from your trash and return it to hand. So this is a great way to get just more of your Confront value. And then during your attack step, with one of your spirits with Confront attacks first during your turn, it's refreshed. This is great for Rex. It's great for that 7 drop that we talked about, which is now just a swinging for 9k and deleting 2 4,000 or BPs or less. Like this is a Confront Nexus I was referencing. It is a little expensive at 3 cores for the level 2, but this is definitely one where if you want to play a neutral red deck where it's just like good value stuff, and this is absolutely one that you're going to want to be looking for, because getting the cards back off the first effects of the Nexus is very strong as well. So love this card. Absolutely curious to see where it ends up. And then getting into our Magic, one of the real all-stars is Big Bang Energy, 4 cost, 2 reduction. During this turn, all Star Dragons Spirit cards in your hand have a cost equal to your life total. So that means the printed cost becomes whatever your life is. So going all the way back to the example of Mars, if you play Big Bang Energy and if you are at 3 life, Mars becomes a 3 cost with full reduction. So yes, you do get to play it for free, which goes back to that whole theme of, if we have an Awakened deck that's going to be like a multi-attacker and be good, Big Bang Energy is definitely a part of that with Mars, with White Hole Dragon, because you're able to surprise your opponent with some extra threats. But you really have to find out what's going to help you stabilize to that point. But the multi-attack with Awakened can certainly end the game itself. And then not to be missed is the second part, select 1 spirit. With flash timing, it gets 2,000 BP during this turn. I guess I should say main or flash. Like there are some instances where you want to cast a BP booster in main, so you play around things like Landmine, or even Burning Force, I guess, or Flame Breath, excuse me, where it can hit it for 4K if you're bumping something else, like whatever. There are like more narrow uses for Ava main, but you're generally using this as a battle trick, especially if you've already gotten like your value play out of the first Big Bang Energy. Just using this as a 2K BP trick can be very, very relevant in certain matchups. The other MVP is a 4 cost, 2 reduction Star Blessed Draw. So the burst is requirement of when your opponent resolves a when summoned effect, you get to draw 2 cards, and then you get to pay, in red 2 or in some other card colors 4 to draw 2 more cards. So this is a draw 4 that is going to see a lot of play in other decks, just because, again, something like white does not have a lot of draw power, and this plus the Volcanic Canyon, which again, the Canyon will help reduce the cost of this card, and white is all about ramping anyway. So I mean, you could just pay 4 for this card and not care. To be fair, you're going to be able to see your threats that you really want to draw, quite consistently thanks to this card. And I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, it's in red. How could they? But so far, the when summon effects are pretty rare, to be fair. So it's not something that you're going to activate as consistently as you want. But especially in white, which again, really needs card draw, having this as an option is huge. Now, to be fair, that means you're not setting a Holy Elixir, which, maybe it's mid to late game. You don't need that Holy Elixir anymore, but that card's pretty strong too. So you have to remember that there is something that you're giving up by placing a burst, and there might come a time where you just have to discard that burst because you need to play a different one out of your hand just to make sure you can survive the next turn. So that is a very conscious balancing effort, in terms of only having 1 burst, and you can't just put, 50 burst in your deck and win the game sort of thing. But I love this card. I'm really curious to see where it's going to end up. Removal spells are always good. Volcanic Break, 5 cost with 2 reduction. With main flash, you can destroy something with 3,000 or fewer BP, or if you pay the Soul Core, 6,000 or fewer. So 6K is a magic number. This card absolutely slaps in a more mid-range mid-range control meta, obviously against aggressive strategies. It's not as good, but I would love to see this as a 2 of in almost every red list, because like there is a good 6K spirit that you want to kill in every color that we've seen so far. So I don't doubt that you would be able to see value in Volcanic Break. It's just one of those things. It's like, do I need 4 of them, right? Because it's such a mid-range heavy meta, or am I just playing this as a 2 of because yellow is, being played a lot and they have like Calamity Beasts that you want to kill. That's a 6K, right? Things like that. So this will be a give and take with the meta, but very excited to have this as a 2 of in most decks going forward. Speaking of more when summon effects, we have Flame Breath, another burst magic with 3 cost, 1 reduction. Select one of your opponent's spirits with 4,000 or fewer BP and destroy it. So this is, again, going back to that main phase, 2,000 plus BP. If you know that your opponent has a Flame Breath and you need to activate a when summoned effect, and let's say you have like a curse unit you need to keep alive, you can play around their burst by just pre-committing that BP, and then they could still activate it technically and get the flash for 2,000, but your opponent's probably going to feel really bad about that if they have to try to survive. So bursts do have quite a bit of ways to play around them if you know what to expect. But Flame Breath is, again, one of those things where 4,000 is a very good number to hit. We don't know how common when summon effects are going to be yet, other than yellow. So this one remains to be seen about how much impact it's going to have in the meta overall. And then Burning Force, absolutely a staple. I mean, 5 cost, 2 reduction. It has Nexus Destruction, which is so rare, so I definitely could see this as a splash in white. But then also the flash effect, select 2 of your opponent's spirits with 3,000 or fewer BP and destroy them. This is really great for early board control against Rex, or if your opponent is playing Freeze It All, you're able to kill 2 of those out, without them getting a bunch of value during their combat step. There's a lot you can be doing with this card that it's another one that's like, it's either going to be a 2 of or a 4 of, just depending on where the meta is going, or if you're playing a white deck or a purple deck and need Nexus removal, yeah, it's expensive at 5, but sometimes you just need that hard removal for Nexus cards, and this does help you get there, right? So Burning Force is really important that if you have something in the main, you can destroy a Nexus, or in the flash timing, just being able to delete a couple of 3,000 BP spirits can be really, really important, from making sure you just don't die any out of nowhere, or if they're playing yellow, like killing Freeze It All can be really important to kill on the spot, and this can clean up 2 of them quite nicely. So I really expect both white and purple to consider splashing this from a board control standpoint, and also just, again, during your main phase, being able to delete a Nexus is really, really important. And with that, it was a long video, but we finally are here at the end. I just wanted to re-highlight like my 3 favorite cards, which should have been quite obvious as we're going through it, but Leon, great flexibility, great meta call card, and it's one of those things I just expect to carry on through multiple sets. Volcanic Canyon, all-star MVP splashable card, gives us that card draw that we want and helps make decks even more consistent. And then Burning Force. Nexus removal already looks to be a staple in terms of things that we have to care about, and killing 2, 3,000 or fewer BPs kind of on the spot can be really good as well. So with that, that is the very long but review of all red cards coming out in BSS-01 or Dawn of History. So what are your favorite cards from red? Is it going to be your main color on set launch, or are you looking to splash some of the cards that we mentioned because they do generate so much value? Definitely let me know in the comments below. So with that, hope to have another starter deck battle video out in the very near future. I just need time to edit and whatnot, but I will be waiting until all purple cards are spoiled to go through them and kind of talk through them again at the high level. And, maybe I should have broken this up into 3 different videos, talk about all the creatures, then the Nexus, then the magic cards, but I wanted to keep this just kind of all together so people can kind of click around where they want. And it'll be fun just to be able to go back to one video and see how we did on our, evaluations and opinions by the end of set 1. So with that, my friends, have a great rest of your week. Remember to stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next Battle Spirits Saga video. Cheers.